This is KSFR, White Rock, Santa Fe.
Welcome to Classical Sunday. I'm Peter Lloyd. For those of you not watching the Super Bowl pre-game program, I have music by Haydn, his Mass in C major. In the second hour, I'll have a conversation with and play music by the New Mexico composer Daniel Stephen Crafts. And if you want to drive down to Albuquerque, Too Much Coffee Man, well, it's a gonzo opera. And in the second hour of the show, I'll speak to the composer of the music, a gonzo opera based on a comic strip by Shannon Wheeler, and with music composed by my guest, Daniel Stephen Crafts. I'll have a conversation with the composer Daniel Stephen Crafts in the second hour of the show. The irrepressible Mr. Crafts calls this beautiful clarinet concertino, played by Laurie Lovato clarinet and Arlette Felberg piano, an iconoclast savors the effects of too much coffee. Well, see what you think of this. clarinet concertino was by my guest, Daniel Stephen Crafts. It was played on this recording by Laurie Lovato, clarinet, and Arlette Felberg, piano. Well, after these messages, I'll be back with Daniel Stephen Crafts. Welcome to the second hour of Classical Sunday on KSFR. I'm Peter Lloyd. Daniel Stephen Crafts, he's known for his strong sense of melody. He's a composer living and working in New Mexico. And he's written in a variety of styles, including operas, orchestral works, chamber music, concertos, and satirical pieces. Well, I'm pleased to say that his piece, Too Much Coffee Man, is going to be revived. And welcome to the show, Daniel. And why don't you give us some details of this revival, where and when, and then we'll get into talking about it.
Yes, hi Peter. Great to talk with you.
It's nice to have you back on the show, Danny.
Yeah, Too Much Coffee Man. Well, it's now in its 11th year. We've been running it places up and down the West Coast, and we even got it to a Broadway festival.
Wow.
About a year ago this time, last January. But it's now part of a series which we're calling Gonzo Opera. And Too Much Coffee Man is the first of three that we'll be doing this year. And it opens in the last weekend in February, Friday and Saturday, the 24th and 25th, and then a matinee on February 26th at the Cell Theater, downtown Albuquerque.
Well, you talk about Gonzo Opera. I mean, there's a little bit of flippancy, but not really. This is a serious way of reconstituting opera so that, as you say, these productions don't end up costing millions of dollars and become a rarity. I mean, you're making this piece live by... Well, I'm sorry to say that our recorded... interview in the way that you do. Let's talk a bit about Gonzo Opera. Back. Okay.
Yes.
Hopefully that's the end of the problem.
Let me give you a little bit of background about how Too Much Coffee Man came to be.
Yeah.
Shannon Wheeler is a wonderful cartoonist whose work even appears in the New Yorker these days. He's been doing Too Much Coffee Man for more than 20 years. And one night, I think about a dozen years ago, we were having dinner in San Francisco, and we thought, hey, it'd be fun to work together, but what would we do? He writes comic books, and I write serious classical music. So the idea of writing an opera on his comic characters came up, and we both thought it was a terrible idea. Dismissed it at that point. Then a couple of months later, Shannon has a dream that his characters are singing opera to him. I don't know if he'd even been to the opera, actually. But anyway, he got up and he wrote down some lyrics and sketched out a basic scenario and sent it to me, and it was absolutely hilarious. I loved it. I had no idea what we'd ever do with it. I really just set it to music just for fun, really. But now he lives up in Portland, and he got the Portland Center for the Performing Arts behind it, and they hired people from the Portland Opera who put it on, and it's this huge hit. To everybody's surprise, actually. Then, if you can believe it, he takes it down to Comic-Con in San Diego, the gigantic comic festival, and we put it on there, and it's a huge hit there. And people kept telling us things like, hey, I thought I hated opera, but this is great. So I always tell people, whether you hate opera or love opera, you're going to have a great time.
And I think a lot of it is, well, it has a libretto of kinds, and I mean, I think the difficult thing that you're pulling off, and perhaps what it explains just why it's getting such a popular response, is that it's a comedy and it's a satire. And that's difficult to pull off well.
Well, Peter, think about comic opera in the 20th century.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't, and
it really doesn't. So basically, for me, it was reinventing the form anew, and it opened up just all kinds of possibilities for me as a composer. And I've had such great fun writing it, just imagining these things happening on stage. And so then I found there was a fellow there in Santa Fe, Thomas Woodward, who writes plays for the Benchwarmers Festival, which many people will know up there. It's an evening of 15-minute plays. And everybody loves it because, hey, if you don't like what you're saying, wait 10 minutes and the next
you get the next one, yeah.
And Toms were always the wildest and craziest of the bunch. So he was telling me about his latest, which this is several years ago now, about a Miss America beauty pageant on live TV that goes hopelessly wrong. And I thought, hey, this would be a great subject. So he was perfectly happy to take his play, which is, of course, just speech rhythms, just natural speech rhythms, and rewrite it as a libretto for me. So that was, then I thought, well, you know, I'm going to need a name for this. So what came to mind was Gonzo Opera, because Gonzo means buffoon in Italian, so there's the Italian connection, and it just seemed like it was just the right kind of contradiction between something crazy and something supposedly serious. So,
but with a point. I mean, I assume that Gonzo, there's some reference there to Hunter Thompson, yes? The late journalist, the Gonzo journalist.
Sure,
yes.
That, but also, as I say, it's Italian for buffoon.
Yes.
So it's...
Yes.
It works really well. And, you know, I mean, comics, it combines the two things I love most, which is social satire and beautiful voices.
And let's get to that, because, you know, one of the distinguishing marks of your music is that melody is important. And let's back into that. Let's talk about your academic training and how that sparked your independence. Well, I mean... Really, I mean, music, as you say, at least opera, as you say, was on a vibe, was on a road to extinction.
Well, as far as academic training, it was interesting. I was accepted into the graduate program of a prestigious music institution. I won't say
you
which.
won't say which one, right?
I won't say which. But anyway, I knew there were definitely things I needed to learn about composition.
Yeah.
So I went in and I had an interview with the head of composition, and I said just that. I said, I know there are things that I need to know, but I'm not at all interested in studying 12-tone music or any of the predominantly dissonant styles. I admit I was pretty cocky then, and I said I find them not only aesthetically repugnant, but politically and philosophically reactionary. Well, he looked at me up and down, and finally he said, well, apparently we have nothing to teach you. Go write rock and roll.
Right.
So I said, well, okay, thank you. You've just saved me a great deal of time. So for the next, how many years, well, even to this day, I studied the masters. And I always say my teachers are Mozart, Wagner, and Prokofiev.
Yeah.
And I truly mean that, because I spent many hours just going through the scores and looking at them and seeing what works and how it works and what they did, and try to go from there.
You speak, I know we've spoken before, and you write about it. You speak of the importance of your collaboration with the late Jerry Hadley, which was probably an affirmation of what you're talking about, this importance of melody and bel canto and beautiful singing and the rest of it. And this great late singer approached you, did he not?
Well, it was interesting. As a matter of fact, we met in a radio interview, just like this. At the time, I was doing a radio program for KPFA in San Francisco, and RCA called me and they said, would you like to do an interview with Jerry Hadley? And I said, you better believe I would like to do an interview with Jerry Hadley. So they set it up, and we got on wonderfully. It was a marvelous, it was the best interview I had ever done, because he was the most interesting person I had ever interviewed. And we talked well beyond what was the interview per se. And at the end, he said, well, you seem to know a lot about singing. Are you a singer? I said, well, no, actually, I'm a composer. And he said, oh, that's interesting. He said, I just, some months ago, I put out a call for scores. And he said, I got more than 200 scores. And I went through every one of them. And I'll be honest, I didn't find a single thing I was interested in doing. But send me some of your work. so of course I did. And, but 3 months later, he called me back and said, you really write melodies. A lot of people say you do, but you really write melody. And he said, I'd love to have you write for me. And so that was the beginning of not only a collaboration, but a wonderful friendship with an extraordinary man.
But you wrote an interesting thing. I came across this with respect to your working with Jerry. If I have a voice in mind, as you did, as you got to know the range of Jerry Hadley, I hear it in my head, and it's easy to create a work that shows all the capabilities of this wonderful instrument. What an interesting, creative way of working. Is it really that literal for you?
Oh, absolutely. It's so much more fun to write for a very specific voice than to just write for abstractly a soprano or a tenor or whatever. If you know and hear that particular voice in your head, melodies come so much more easily, and you can write to people's strengths or write to what you want to hear them sing. And that's what's so wonderful about it. And very recently, I have been working with a fabulous coloratura mezzo who lived for many years in Santa Fe by the name of Deborah Domansky.
Oh, yes, Deborah, sure.
Deborah I heard her sing for the first time, I don't know how many years ago, at the Santa Fe Opera. Mm-hmm. And as I was walking out, I said to my friend, we have to remember this name. This is somebody who is really exceptional. And I still say she's the most amazing of all the wonderful young singers that have come through the Santa Fe Opera. She stands out in my mind as the best. And I never dreamed that we'd become friends, but we have. And I've actually now written a number of works specifically for her, and that is great fun because in that sense, I know I can write anything, virtually anything, and she can do it and make it sound beautiful.
And I mean that idea of knowing and living within the voice and treating it as an instrument is very much in the world of Handel and Mozart, who would, without thinking too hard about it, transform and create scores that made up for the weakness or certainly amplified the strengths of particular singers, which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And there were a couple of pieces that I had already written before I met Deb, and that I rewrote specifically for her voice.
And if you're just joining the show, I'm talking to the, I think it's fair to say, New Mexico composer Daniel Steven Crafts. And, what makes all of this very timely is that a revival of his gonzo opera, Too Much Coffee Man, is going to be performed at the end of the month, February the 24th through the 6th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, down at the Cell Theatre. That's 700 First Street Northwest in downtown Albuquerque. There's a number, if you're intrigued with this, 505-766-9412. Let's revisit how this comic strip libretto got into music. I'm intrigued by the informality, but apparently the way that this is cohered in a very successful way. Was it an arduous working process, or it was almost an instantaneous sparking off of one another?
Well, I think it was fairly arduous for Shannon because he'd never done anything even vaguely like this before. In fact, he made a cartoon strip out of it where I had sent him some parts of it that I had written, and he listened and he said, "Oh yeah, it's got melody. It's catchy. It works with the strip." And then the character says, "And now I'm going to have to write an entire opera." So for me, it was very, very easy. I wrote it very quickly, and I was sorry when I finished it because it was so much fun. And so that's why I think I wanted to go on and write more in this style, this satiric comic style. So.
All right. Well, so it is a libretto, which means that there is a story. I confess, until now, I've not seen the piece. So, and some of our listeners will be in the same boat. Give us a taste for how this thing unfolds.
Oh, okay. Well, it is very much based on the comic strip, if you've ever seen any of the comic. And in fact, you can always go to tmcm.com. That's easy enough to remember. Too Much Coffee Man, tmcm.com, and find Shannon's comics. But basically, Too Much Coffee Man and his buddy Espresso Guy hang around the coffee shop all day, waxing prolific about life, love, the universe. And both are secretly in love with the barista. But essentially they're nerds, and neither one has guts enough to go up and actually say anything to her. So time goes on, and at one point on this particular day, Espresso Guy decides he's going to make a move on the barista, and he goes up and he starts to hit on her, essentially. Well, Too Much Coffee Man gets a look at this and says, "Wait a minute, I'm not going to have that happen." So he goes up and he sings this heartfelt serenade to the barista, and where he pours out his heart. And at the end of it, her reaction is, "I'm not paid enough to put up with this kind of crap." So then at the end, she comes out of her shell, and I won't give it all away because there's also some wonderful surprises, but she comes out of her shell and we find out what she's really all about. But then in the end, it returns that Too Much Coffee Man, his greatest love is coffee.
And on that kind of light-hearted tone, well, that's an invitation that I think few could resist. So, Too Much Coffee Man, the end of the month. But let's end the conversation, on a different tone. I mean, there's depth and dimensions to your work, Daniel. And we talked earlier about your collaboration with Jerry Hadley. And out of this collaboration came one of your best known, I think it's fair to say, works, which is the song and the slogan. And after our conversation finishes, I intend to play this. Why don't you give us an introduction to this piece, how it came about and what you intended and how and why it worked, do you think?
Well, after Jerry decided that he wanted me to write for him, we were talking about what would be the subject. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and Jerry came through to sing with the San Francisco Opera, and we met, and he had a volume of poems by Carl Sandburg with him. And he told me that he grew up in the Illinois corn country, the same place that Sandburg did. And Sandburg was always kind of a hero of his. Sandburg, besides being a poet, was very much a political activist during the Depression. He would make speeches on behalf of working people, but he would pepper them by singing folk songs. So anyway, Jerry had taken this volume of Sandburg and he had underlined passages and sometimes short poems that meant a great deal to him. And he said, "Now, I wonder if you could take these and make it into a song cycle or a long vocal work." And I did, and the thing was, Jerry was very good at picking out passages that actually had a kind of musical rhythm to them. Now, just before that, people were still writing in regular meters. But Sandburg was part of that movement where poets were moving out of regular meters into more free speech.
Yeah.
But Jerry found any number of wonderful passages in essentially the prairie, Sandburg's long poem. And so I was able to take those and weave melodies around them. And what I tried to do was write melodies that, while they were original melodies, but sounded like they could have been folk melodies, so that would be very much in Sandburg's tradition, who loved American folk music. So that was essentially how that came about, and we were fortunate enough that PBS picked it up and took the work and made it into a TV program.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And well, Daniel Stephen Crafts, congratulations on your continued perseverance. And on the upcoming revival of Too Much Coffee Man, I'll be announcing that ahead of the productions, February the 24th through the 26th. And here is the work that Danny just talked about, the song and the slogan, an interpretation of poems by Carl Sandburg, as sung by Jerry Hadley. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter.
We've been listening to a piece composed by my guest, Daniel Stephen Crafts, the song and the slogan, setting of poems by Carl Sandburg. The performance featured Jerry Hadley, tenor, and the faculty ensemble of the School of Music, University of Illinois, Barbara Hedlund, cello, and Eric Dalheim, piano. The conductor was Paul Vermeil. After these messages, I'll be back with music by Alberto Ginastera.